Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Thanks so much for joining this webinar on how to evaluate motor carriers in your supply chain. We're very excited to show you our new product, SureCarrier, and how it can help you evaluate your motor carriers. My name is David Asvig. I'll be your host today. Today's time is going to be split into two parts. First, we've invited one of our customers, Annette Jones at Lawast, to talk about how they are evaluating their motor carriers and talk a little bit about the product SureCarrier. The second half of the presentation is actually a product demonstration. So we'll show you SureCarrier and how it enables you to track and trend the safety performance of motor carriers in your supply chain. As a reminder, you are in listen-only mode. If you want to send in questions, there's a Q&A tab at the top of your screen, and we'd love for you to send in any questions you have during this presentation. We'll get to them at the end of the presentation, and that'll be a great time for you to ask questions as well. I did want to give you a brief introduction to today's speakers. I'm joined by Alex Dalpe, Annette Jones, and Matt Anderson. Annette Jones is a logistics manager, controlling and freight for Lawast, and she's been with Lawast North America for about 12 years and is accountable for the logistics reporting of distribution costs along with managing the freight payment team, which includes the management and administrative duties for transportation providers. We actually started working with Lawast about 2 years ago and about 1 year with the transportation group at Lawast. I'm also joined by Alex Dalpe. He's a professional manager here at Browse. He has 8 years of compliance experience in the private and public sector. Alex received a Master of Science in the field of regulatory compliance and data analysis, and Alex has actually worked very closely with Annette and Lawast on their contractor management program, and specifically the implementation of the SureCarrier product. Lastly, I'm joined by Matt Anderson. He's a product manager here at Browse. Matt has actually had a big hand in releasing 2 mobile apps that were released in 2015. Dealing with U.S. and Canadian workforce regulations. And he's actually working on 2 new apps that will be released this year. One that we're very excited about coming up in the next month or 2, which will allow you to track employees of your suppliers. For example, licenses, certifications, background checks, and will allow you to check people in and out of QR codes. And so Matt's working on some very exciting stuff, and he had a big hand in the SureCarrier product, which he'll be demonstrating today. I'd like to, before we jump into SureCarrier, just give you a brief description of Browse. I think that helps set up the context and how SureCarrier fits into your supplier, contractor, vendor management. Contractor pre-qualification and management continues to be a critical part of most businesses' operations. Because the partners you choose to work with, they can greatly affect your supply chain and have the ability to impact the overall performance of the company. To give you a brief overview, Browse has been around for about 15 years. We actually started in the United States in the mining space. One of our very first clients, Rio Tinto, has one of the largest open pit mines here in Salt Lake. Today they're still a client, and they've actually expanded their relationship to parts around the world. If you would ask what Browse does, at the end of the day, Browse delivers assurance. You're working with safe, qualified, and socially responsible contractors. There's really 4 basic steps, as you can see here on the screen. And we use this, we do this using a methodology that's really tried and true. The 4 steps are, up front, we're going to work with you on strategic planning, consulting, sharing some best practices. It's a very collaborative approach on understanding your business and the risk that suppliers and third parties can bring to your business. We then configure a solution which is scalable and tailored to fit your business needs. And after we build out that program, suppliers and contractors are asked to go through an interview. They submit qualification data that you have asked them to complete. We will actually validate and score that data using our web-based software technology and our service team that's really there to partner with your team and help your contractors understand your requirements to become compliant with those regulatory requirements. The end result is that you gain compliance status with your suppliers. You know and are confident that they will meet your needs and are approved to your standards. So Matt, with that introduction, I'd like you to introduce today what we're here to talk about, which is our brand new product, SureCarrier.
Okay. So I wanted to discuss SureCarrier, and Browse is, as David mentioned, able to work with a lot of different sorts of industries, a lot of different sorts of supply chains, including construction, manufacturing, consumer goods, natural resources, lots of different kinds of supply chains. And what we always hear is that many of those supply chains include the transportation of goods. And that's why we're discussing a particular aspect of supply chains today, which is motor carriers. And so when you look to evaluate a motor carrier in your supply chain, you can look at their insurance, you can look at online reviews, you can undertake an effort to audit them yourself, keeping the results in a SharePoint somewhere or something like that. Or you can use a solution like the one that we have at Browse, which is an interview that gives you a sort of pass-fail score based on the criteria that you, as the Browse client, have specified. Now, some of the data that you might have access to for motor carriers is available online through the FMCSA, but it's difficult to find. It can be confusing. It can be particularly hard if you have 200 suppliers in your supply chain that you're trying to track. Also, when you look at the data on an FMCSA site, it generally shows you a single carrier at a time and does not show you your multiple carriers. So when you have a method of looking up to find data on a motor carrier, you might have to do it 200 times. So SureCarrier simplifies the process of evaluating your motor carriers. It pulls all of the data together, making it easy to track and trend the FMCSA/Department of Transportation safety and performance of motor carriers in your supply chain. And SureCarrier is just one small part of the main product that we offer, which is called SureQualify. It's an add-on, and it assesses, SureQualify assesses suppliers on many other performance and risk indicators such as safety, insurance coverage, financial stability, and more. And so with that, I wanted to turn the time over to Alex and Annette, where they're going to kind of talk about LaWast and how Browse and LaWast have worked together to come up with some solutions. Alex?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alex Dalpe. I'm a professional services manager here at Browse. I manage several clients' accounts, including LaWast, and I am with Annette Jones. Annette, are you there?
Hi, I'm here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you for taking the time to be part of this webinar. So I have a couple of questions for you. We're very interested to get your feedback as a client. And first, can you tell us more about LaWast and what your company does?
Sure. LaWast North America is a division of the LaWast Group, which is a family-owned Belgian company that was established in 1889. LaWast North America is a leading producer of lime, limestone, and clay products with plants and terminals that stretch from California to as far east as Virginia and as far south as Florida and everything in between. We actually transport product via rail, truck, and barge. However, majority of our products touch a truck in many cases. One of the things that is important to LaWast is safety. Safety matters, and it's a big proponent of LaWast, and we want to partner with transportation providers that also value safety.
Great. So a lot to keep track, I'm assuming.
Yes, definitely.
So following question. So before you partnered with Browse, how were you managing your carriers?
Before we partnered with Browse, it was a very manual process of collecting, storing, and communicating to the field carriers' qualifications. Some of the information may be with the corporate Fort Worth, Texas office, and some of the information was actually out in the field in the regional office. The Fort Worth office used to manage a database, and it was a very tedious process, and it wasn't always updated in a timely manner, especially when we had documents going to some of the field offices and not to the Fort Worth office. So Browse helped us alleviate some of that problem and have a database that was available and access to everybody in the company.
So keeping track of data and accurate and updated data was probably the most challenging aspect of that manual task. Am I right?
That's correct. And sometimes some of the work was duplicated, and also we had an issue with having the right information to the right people. So Fort Worth may have the information, but someone that's at one of our plants getting ready to load a carrier needs to know if that carrier meets our qualifications. Should they be on site? Are they an approved carrier? And now Browse gives us that visibility.
I see. Another question for you. So, Loaz and Browse, we've been partners now for a good year. How has been that relationship so far?
Oh, the relationship has been great. It's wonderful to partner with a company that, one, listens to and understands your wants and needs, two, that's able and flexible enough to cater to those needs, and three, values and support a collaborative partnership. But above all, able to provide a viable solution to some of our concerns and issues.
Good to hear. Good to hear. And since the creation of the Shared Carrier tool, what is new from your perspective about the way you manage your carriers and contractors?
Well, now we have a tool that's accessible, that's up to date, and allows the opportunity for us to identify the level of risk we're taking. We also allows us to build a carrier scorecard and a performance evaluation. So we're looking at several things to make not only if the carrier is compliant with our insurance needs, but looking at some of the other things as far as safety stats. So when we're looking at a group of carriers specifically for a certain region, we can see based on the scorecard that we put in place and the performance evaluations which ones will have a lower risk and which ones we should use. And the information now is right at our fingertips for the people out in the field to use.
So did you learn anything surprising, with the new tool compared to before?
Yes, I think some of the biggest surprises is the level of risk, specifically with a particular carrier that we thought maybe, say, if they met all of our insurance requirements, may have some issues on some of their safety stats. And with them being a bigger carrier, we wouldn't think that would be an issue. But now that we're looking at it and we have the ability to monitor it on a consistent basis, now it's opening our eyes to see what our true risk is.
And with all the data available and stored under the same platform, we're not just only talking about DOT, but also insurance information, the safety ratings, and also other information that pertains to each carrier. Do you think you're more effective in managing your supply chain?
Yes, definitely. Now that it's stored in one location, the biggest asset from using Browse is putting that visibility and the tool in the right person's hand at the right time. If someone in the field doesn't have to call Fort Worth or ask me to look up something for them, they have the tool, they can look it up for themselves. I'm sure later on we'll talk about the mobile app. They can pull it up on their phone when, customer service is looking to book a load or assign a carrier a load. They can check to see if that carrier meets our qualifications and verified if they are already one of the preferred carriers for that location. So definitely having the tool available and having it visible to the people at the plant and the people in the corporate office.
So you were just talking about the client mobile app that we've launched last year, and which is quite popular with a lot of our clients. As a tool, what do you think of it? Did it bring a lot of benefit to you and members of your organization?
Oh, I love it. I think that's probably one of my favorite pieces of the program because now it frees me up to do a lot of other duties that I have in the Fort Worth office. So now if I have a regional logistics manager out in the field and they have a question about a carrier, they can pull up their app on their phone and they can see the information right at their fingertips without waiting for me to call them back or for someone in my office to follow up with them. So they have the information and it's readily available.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to bring your laptop everywhere on site.
Right. And actually, some of our locations is in a remote, and if a loadout person has an issue and he doesn't have a laptop, a lot of people do have a cell phone. They can pull up that app, click on the browse, and see if that particular carrier that just came in is approved or met our qualifications.
And, we're almost done, with our little discussion here. And that, two more questions for you. What is the single biggest impact, would you say, that Browse has had on your organization so far?
The single biggest impact is, again, the visibility. Like I said, we have plants and terminals from California to Florida and Virginia, and the corporate office in Fort Worth, Texas, was trying to manage all that, and it was hard to get the information to the right people and also to make sure the information we had was current and up to date. So the biggest impact is putting that visibility out there, and everyone has access to the tool and can view the carriers in their region.
And if you would rate Browse on our performance, how would you rate our ability to address your needs?
A+++.
Wow.
When we originally worked with Browse, it started with our purchasing department, and supply chain and logistics, our needs were a little different. So we wanted to partner with the company, but we wanted to keep them separate because our needs were a little different and our qualifications were a little different. And we didn't have any issues with Browse splitting up the two departments and setting up and working with myself, my regional managers, understanding what our need is and coming up with solutions for those needs, and working with us on a weekly basis, a monthly basis with updates. One of the things, if we had an issue or a problem and we brought it to Browse, it was, I think we can help you with that. Let's try it. And we worked it out. So, it's been great.
Great. Well, I'm happy to hear this. I hope my boss is listening.
Give him my number.
And we have a lot of people on this webinar, and I'm sure they're going to have some follow-up questions. So please, if any one of you have questions for Annette or myself later on, please feel free to submit your question through the webinar. And my last question for you, Annette, what advice would you give to the people on this webinar who are looking into ways to improve their own management of their supply chain?
The advice I would give would be first to identify your need, your level of risk, and how you can minimize that. Second is make sure you have the right people at the table. you have to get buy-in a lot of times from the cross-functional departments, sales, ops, logistics, purchasing.
Totally agree.
This may be a function for logistics or purchasing, but a lot of times you still need the cooperation from several different departments to implement it and to make it work.
Great. No, I totally agree with you. Well, Annette, thank you for your time and answering my questions and for your insight. It was a pleasure doing this presentation with you. I'll be handing the presentation back to Matt, who is now going to do a demonstration of the Shared Carrier tool.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette.
And like Alex mentioned, if you guys have questions that you'd like to address towards Alex, Annette, or myself, use the Q&A section in the webinar tool. So what I'm going to show today is Sure Carrier, which is a small wing off of our main platform, which is called Sure Qualify. And some background on the development of this tool. It started with, like a lot of the things that we do here at Browse, it started with our clients coming to us and expressing a need to our professional services team. So you've been listening to Alex. He's the professional services manager that's been dealing with WASP. We specifically had somebody that came to somebody that Alex works with, Joel, and kind of put this idea in his head. And over the past couple of years, we've done some development of this tool. The work we've done on this project began long before I joined the company. I joined the company last year in 2015, and some background on how we started this. In the beginning, we toyed with some ideas where, like, suppliers were entering their own data, maybe once a year or maybe every 6 months or that kind of thing, on, you know, if they've had violations in their inspections or if they've had crashes, et cetera. And it didn't turn out to work out that well. So the next step was we as the Browse team assigned a few folks to look up the publicly available data on, you know, government websites and populate it on behalf of the suppliers so that we could do this kind of work. And where it is now is there's an opt-in process for a motor carrier supplier. So if you have somebody in your supply chain that you would like to use the Browse system, the supplier actually opts into a process where they put in their DOT number, they pay an annual rate, and data gets tracked. So the data that we use is publicly available data, and so now it's more of a behind-the-scenes kind of process. So this benefits clients that are using the product because they don't have to do day-to-day management on it. Browse is kind of handling it for them behind the scenes. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to get out of this, and I'm going to show you some of my things that I have available here. And so, what we're kind of talking about is that we have, for example, this sort of data from the FMCSA website, and this has been available for several years, and this is an example of a supplier. You see, it's not necessarily a real supplier here, but what you could see, you know, just by Googling that supplier's name and looking up this information was, you could see, you know, that a DOT number was registered on the FMCSA site, and certain metrics were available. And when you went down in the page, because it's a fairly long page, you could see other things that were available. And the FMCSA, you know, puts up data and takes down data based on the regulations that they have to abide by because of the Senate and Congress. But this is an example of the kind of motor carrier that you might have interest in. And so one thing that you can do when you go down on the page is you can tap here, which goes to carrier registration details, and you can see more information about the carriers when they registered to have a DOT number, the DOT number they were granted, what kinds of estimates they had on the number of trucks, the number of drivers, whether or not they operated interstate, what their email address is. Also, even things like what kind of industry they did work with. You know, you might want to pay even more close attention to somebody if they were hauling, you know, flammable materials or, you know, something like that, as opposed to like this one that does construction. And so that was just kind of their registration details. But you also then would have an area on the page where it gives you more of a complete profile, and it would give you some percentages of violations and some things like that. Even, you know, things like where they stack up on a relative basis to other motor carriers, which is always a source of controversy about how suppliers should be judged. But if you were to click on like the complete SMS profile down there, then it would bring you to this kind of information here, which would tell you, it would give you this large list. Some data is not public at the moment for the next 15 months or so, but it would give you something like this where it would have like a violation summary of all of the violations by date. You start to notice some things when you look at this kind of data is that, well, one violation is that maybe the tubing is chafing, or there's a brake hose problem, windshield wipers are malfunctioning, that kind of thing. But then there's other things like that might be a little bit more severe that are things like driving past the 11-hour rule, you know, fairly severe things like a false report on a driver's log. And it has even more data as you start to go down this list. This is all publicly available. You don't have to log in to see any of this data. And so we still have access to all of that data and a lot more, actually. So what we've done is we've taken a lot of this sort of data. One other thing I wanted to touch on, actually. Right up here at the top is one of the most important pieces of data that we collect is the OOS percentage, which is out of service percentage. It means for vehicles that are inspected under this carrier, 11.8% of the time they get taken off the road. That includes roadside or inspection stations. And you can compare it with things like the national average. And you see, well, this carrier is doing better than the national average because a score of 0 is perfect. When you do the same calculation of the driver, you see the drivers don't do quite as well as the vehicles in the inspections. But lots and lots of data to calculate. Imagine you're at a company like Lhoist and you have to look at this for 50, 100 motor carriers. How often would you decide to go out and do that? It's a little difficult. So there's a few tools out on the market. We aren't the only one. Browse Sure Carrier is a tool that we've integrated this sort of analysis into, and it goes in addition to the other things that we do, where it's like we track insurance, we track non-motor carrier kinds of things. So we've kind of added this over the past year and a half to our suite of products. So that an important point I brought up earlier is, yes, suppliers log in to our system and they opt in for this program. And I'm going to show you kind of what it would look like if you were somebody that logged into our system. And just so everybody knows, we are currently undergoing a refresh of the UI. So this will all change the way that it looks right now, but I'm showing you some of the current ways that the product looks, and we are looking to change that over the next few months. You see, I've logged in as that same supplier, which has a false name. It's not not a real supplier. And you see, I have an interview that I go through, and I have lots of sections. And so, for example, if I were working with LOAST would be asking me some questions that on who I am, on what areas of business I'm in, what industry codes I use, what are my users that can log into the system. And then an important one that comes up for a lot of people is that you can have your suppliers enter in their insurance policies, their liability policies, that sort of thing. You can find out if they're properly insured to do business with you. But more of the main thing that we're talking about today, which is SureCarrier, is that there is a transportation interview that you would go through as well. And each client is different, but clients would ask questions like this. They would ask, are you subject to DOT regulations? Do you have certificates for the transportation of Hazmat? You would enter in a DOT number, and it actually would check in the system to see that it's a valid number. Is it 5 to 7 digits? Is it perhaps mistyped? Is it perhaps falsified? That sort of thing. So it validates that you have the correct number. And once we have the number in the system, we're able to continue looking at that number as we go. Also, you can opt into to this sort of question where you say, I carry passengers, or I carry Hazmat, because the restrictions that carriers that have passengers or Hazmat, they have more of a constricted kind of threshold. So it's important for us to ask questions like that. And as I said, it asks if you're subject to DOT regulations. If you never leave your state, you might not be. So you know, client by client, we have a different questionnaire. Might include insurance questions, might not. Might include some of these questions or others. And this is the example of sort of what you would go through as a motor carrier. Once we have the piece of information where it showed the DOT number, you see what we can do here is we track it month to month. And so data changes in the FMCSA world. So, but we were tracking it. We were tracking this particular carrier all through last year, including when some laws changed in December, and we were able to track them. And as I said, 0% is a perfect score, 100% is a bad score in this world, and so you're able to look at it kind of month by month like this. You also have a reminder down at the bottom that what are the good scores, what are the bad scores, what are the averages. Presents you a link back to the FMCSA in case you want to look at their FAQ page. Once you have all of this, this data here, you have this idea of a graph. And so this shows like where we were in December. I'll go back to November. And you see where the carrier is with regard to the national thresholds. The national thresholds for a general carrier are 65% or 80%, depending on the category. And you see, like, this particular one that we're looking at has some issues with HOS compliance, and they also have some issues with vehicle maintenance. So what that would say to you, if you were looking at this particular carrier and doing an analysis, is that they have some issues with drivers driving right to the limit of the hours that they're allowed to drive, and also that the trucks that they are using might have some maintenance issues. They might be using used trucks, etc. But on the other hand, they are getting a perfect score for unsafe driving. They don't have any examples of unsafe driving or controlled substances and alcohol, which those are much more severe. So, so it's really cool that you get to look at this and you can go through through time like this and take a look at the data that we have gathered. Now, another thing that we have is not just the look at a carrier one at a time kind of idea, but we also have this idea of showing multiple carriers all at once so that you can compare them. If you are a client and you have lots and lots of carriers and it's difficult for you to manage, we have this sort of idea where you can pull up a report. If it's difficult to see this, keep in mind that in your webinar you can hit the maximize button and it'll show more of a full screen kind of view. And these are all false names of carriers. They are not real carriers. These are all false DOT IDs, so just so you know, you're not looking at necessarily real motor carriers here. But for this example of these different motor carriers, you can see that you can compare apples and apples. So if I'm looking at unsafe driving, I can see that I have a bunch of carriers that are at almost 0%, which is great, and then I have a few that might be more problematic. A few of them that are highlighted have unacceptably high rates of unsafe driving. And I, as a client, I can set my own thresholds. I don't have to just be following the U.S. government's threshold. It might be 65% or 80%. If I want to, I can look at a report like this and I can say, you know what, maybe I want my percentage to be more like 20%, because I can see that there's lots of carriers out there that have rates below 20%. I would still have lots to choose from there. But the main reason why you have this kind of tool is you take your existing supply chain, your existing suppliers that you're going to continue doing business with anyway, and you just look at them month to month to make sure everything is as you expect. One of the coolest things about looking at a report like this is it has the highlighted number of failures for each of your motor carriers. So this one here, for example, they have 7 failures. Well, it's actually because their DOT number is not retrieving any information. So it looks a lot higher than it actually probably would be. But there are some others like this that, hey, they have one area that they need to be working on, so one thing is highlighted, and I can look at this kind of trend this way. When I go down to the bottom of the report, you know, I can look at something that's pretty cool, and this is a client-by-client sort of average, so I can look at, based on my list of 50 motor carriers here, what are the averages? What are the things that actually I can expect out there in the real world so that I can make sound judgments based on my motor carriers? And you can see that vehicle maintenance is the highest percentage category. That's going to be across all industries, I would say. And then some other things like controlled substances and alcohol. If we look at all of the carriers here that I've pulled from, they're all at 0%. There's nobody that's above 0% for controlled substances and alcohol. So that's a great measurement tool where you can start to know what's the norm for a motor carrier. And so we've been very excited to have this as part of our product here that we're showing today. So the ideal kind of situation we see where you might use a tool like this is in a supply chain. As we talked about earlier, you know, one thing we know about doing business in supply chain compliance, because we're not necessarily in the transportation business, we're in the supply chain business, is that supply chains use motor carriers quite a bit. They even use them in industries like ports, like railroads. Railroads actually need motor carriers to do business sometimes. So the great thing is that this kind of part of the Browse solution fits right into what you're doing with your supply chain. We have lots of other features unrelated to motor carriers that we also offer, and this is just one aspect of the Browse solution that will handle this part of your supply chain. And it's a small part, It's a thing where we point this out to you if we know that you're using trucking in your supply chain. But we're excited to tell you about this today. And with that, I'm gonna hand this back to David, and we'll take some questions and do some summarizing.
Great, Matt. Thanks so much. I do want to get going on the questions. I want to thank Alex and Annette. Thank you so much for telling that story. As we had mentioned before, if you have questions, there's a Q&A button towards the top of your screen. Click on that. Go ahead and send in a question. I actually just want to get kicked off right away with some questions. And Matt, I think we had a few questions that are quite similar, and maybe you could help with this. I'll maybe ask a few, and then you can answer that in one question. Questions relating to you were showing basic scores, which hasn't been available to the public since November. How do you get the CSA SMS scores? Basically, a lot of questions about a lot of this data people are asking about what happened in December. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we get to get this data is we get a data pull. It's on the FMCSA website under the Tools Download area. And there's lots of really, really massive CSV files that have information on this. There's a couple of other companies that also utilize this sort of information. And so one thing that came out in the December 4th law, which was the FAST Act, was that the inspection and violation data will remain available. And it is still available there. The idea of the relative percentile score is not front and center on the FMCSA website. We still have a lot of data that we're getting that allows us to come up with a continuation of the data that we previously had. It's not 100% dead on exactly like it was before, but it will continue to help you make decisions about motor carriers in your supply chain.
Matt, if I may add, this is Alex. My understanding, and Matt, correct me, basically the data is still available like before, but not like before because a lot of it is not public anymore. But we could do those data pool, and what we've done is we have put that data through a several set of calculation and coding in order to bring that information back in our Sure Carrier tool. Am I right?
Yes, that's correct. So Browse was not dependent on publicly looking at each of the carriers in the website. We had been using the downloaded file before that is still available. In fact, there's more data than we had ever thought we would have at this point after the December 4th bill. So we still have access to data that we were having access to before.
Alex, I want to ask this of you. The question came in, is there a place for carriers to upload certificates of insurance in the same way they can upload Hazmat certificates?
Yes. Well, the Sure Carrier tool itself provides information related to the DOT, file of a carrier. If you want to add certificate of insurance, we do have that ability in the system, and that's what's great about the Browse system. You could add these requirements. So instead of following and tracking insurance requirements in one database within your organization and then go search for DOT information directly on the Federal Motor Carriers website, Browse offers you the ability to combine all that information in one single platform. So just like Matt showed you earlier, there's different sections as a client that you have access to in the system. And if you want to look at insurance information and what the supplier has provided, you could do so. We could run compliance rules, depending on the limits and requirements that you have on your insurance. We could set those rules, and if the carrier satisfy these rules, they're going to show green or red if they don't. And it's the same thing with the Sure Carrier tool. We could link those criteria to business rules, make them green if they are under a certain threshold, and red if they're above. So I hope I answered the question.
Yes, thank you. Another question, does this work with all types of carriers? Rail, LTL, TL, ocean, express carriers, air? Matt, you comment on that?
The tool, as shown today, is going to work for somebody that has a US DOT number. So you'll want to use it for the motor carrier type of vendor. And you know, when we're certainly open to looking at other types of transportation carriers as well. We definitely have them in our various supply chains. So we'll be happy to work with you if you have other needs besides the over-the-road trucking kinds of companies.
Thanks, Matt. Another question. We haul sand and many of our carriers use older trucks. Vehicle maintenance can be an issue, but isn't as important as other metrics such as unsafe driving. Can I pick and choose the metrics to look at?
Yeah, you know, that's a really good point. So, you know, some of the industries that you might be doing business in have certain metrics where you'd want to be looking at them more closely than others. So you could run a rule off of one metric, for example, controlled substances or unsafe driving, and elect not to look at something like vehicle maintenance. That's a common kind of thing. Also, you could make rules for all the categories, but you could make them more constrictive for some than others based on your particular needs.
Thanks. There's a question, is there a cost to a carrier to get added to your system?
Yeah, I'll take that. And this will be something that you know, we can talk about in more depth if we set you up where we do more of a personal call. There is an annual fee for a motor carrier to opt into this program, and it starts very reasonably, and it also is adjustable. So if we are doing something like tracking insurance or tracking some kind of more of the hazardous material kind of qualifications, it gets more expensive, but the base rate is $95. So that is the base rate, and then if you want to add other features to that, then it can get a little bit larger than $95.
Great. Another question, and Alex, I'll pose this to you, is asking about the implementation timeline for a product like this.
So if you're a new client and you'd like to be, you know, to have your own program to manage your supply chain within LOAS, it could take 45 to 90 days, and that depends on the complexity of your program, the amount of requirements, and, you know, of course, the simpler the program, you know, usually the faster we can implement this. The more complex, you know, a little bit more time is needed. But usually within that time frame, once we have all your requirements and understand your business needs, usually 45 to 90 days is the average timeline for implementation.
Matt, we had just a question come in of clarification on the cost. Is that monthly or yearly?
Our suppliers pay annual costs, so the $95 that I mentioned is an annual cost. Okay.
Question, what other data can you collect for carriers and contractors? So I think this is related to beyond some of the information on the FMCSA website. Alex, do you want to talk to some of the other data you can track on suppliers, contractors, and motor carriers?
Yes. Like I mentioned before, you know, we track insurance data, which means that we ask suppliers to provide their insurance information, their certificate, browse, verify, and store that data, and runs that data to rules and requirements that you have set. We have safety statistics data that we do collect, OSHA, MSHA. Of course, the Sure Carrier tool Matt, do you want to add anything?
Yes, EHS management surveys.
Surveys,
yeah.
any specific documentation that you may need from the supplier, we could track. We have the ability to customize that in the system. And there's various other sections that we do have in the system that do not come to my mind right now.
And, you know, there's other, as David mentioned earlier, we're coming out with another app very soon that tracks more at the employee kind of level, where you'll be able to look at the employee's credentials and qualifications, and you'll be able to have an insight into that. Additionally, we are rolling out some more audit kinds of features as well in the near future, where you'll be able to keep track of audits of your supply chain that you do. So,
I'll jump in too. We also have a partnership with Experian to track financial viability of a company, so likelihood of going bankrupt, defaulting, anything like that. We're finding that many companies want to know how financially stable their suppliers and contractors are, and so that is also another element you can add to a program to manage your supply chain. Do you have any plans to bring in data that's not government data?
you know, that's definitely something that we're looking at in the future as well. You see that there's a customizable questionnaire that you can ask about motor carrier things, and that's based on what somebody like Alex would talk to you about when they were setting up you as a client in the Browse system. And if you have other needs that maybe come outside of that sort of data that we're collecting right now, we would be open to finding data from other sources as well, including other companies that might be tracking motor carriers and that sort of thing in the future.
And go ahead, Annette.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to also add one of the things that LWASP was pleased with was that the flexibility that Browse allowed us to have. So on the transportation side, one of the things we also wanted Browse to house is transportation contracts. So not only are they capturing DOT safety stats along with their certificate of insurance, but they are also keeping track and make sure we have a signed transportation agreement on file. And also you have the opportunity to do site-specific training and keep a log of that for our vendors that are at the plant, not just for our transportation providers, but any vendor that comes on site, they have to go through specific training for that location, and Browse is able to house that information as well.
Thank you, Annette.
No problem.
We've had another question here. As a client, would it cost $95 a year base rate? And so if I am a carrier and I have multiple companies using Browse, does the annual fee get charged once or per company?
Well, you know, that's something that we'll probably have to take a little bit offline with you. We weren't going to necessarily cover the client costs in this call, but let me just say they're very reasonable, and a lot of this will be with your account setup, basically, where when we're setting up an account to track one kind of supplier or another kind of supplier, the costs are generally fairly similar. So a lot of times we'll just have to talk to you about implementation fee, account setup kinds of fees.
And to answer the second question, if I'm a carrier and have multiple companies, you know, depending on your primary association within the Browse system, you pay the fee associated with that program. But if you are associated with another program, there's an association cost, which varies depending on the service level of that program. So it can be anything from $100 to $200 a year, depending on the complexity, again, and the service level of the program.
Great. Matt, a question for you. How frequently is this data pulled into the system?
We do it at the beginning of the month in general, so monthly.
Great. Are there any plans for a mobile app for carriers?
You know, that's something that I'm glad you said that because we've released 2 mobile apps last year, the Browse for Clients app and the Browse for Suppliers app. And this year we're going to be releasing 2 additional ones. Actually, look forward to a webinar in the next 45 days where we'll discuss our 3rd app. And, you know, if this continues to prove to be something that people have a strong interest in, we're in the mobile app business, so we'll be open to adding an additional mobile app if all of you agree. So.
Another question, are new clients required to provide you with carriers or trucking companies that we would need to track, or would the new client have access to the database that you already have in place?
Well, you know, as we highlighted, there's an opt-in process, so you'll opt into the Browse system as a client, and then things happen from there. So Browse, we rely on you to tell us which carriers you want to be doing business with, and then we take it from there.
Yeah. If you allow me to clarify, so during the implementation phase, you know, of course, we design the database according to your requirements and your needs. But we do ask you for a list of carriers or suppliers that you work with. Of course, you know, some of these suppliers and carriers may already be in the system, so that facilitates greatly the onboard process of these carriers or suppliers to your program. And then if they're not, well, we have a team that are specifically assigned to reaching out to those suppliers during the registration phase to get them on board with the program.
And that's a really good point that you know, is worth bringing up, that each of the suppliers that you add into our system have a designated person that will help them be the best Browse suppliers that they can be for you in your supply chain. Just like Alex has been a great asset for Annette at Lawast, each of your suppliers that you bring into the supply chain in Browse will have its own representative. They sit just on the other side of the building from me and Alex, actually. So, so it's something that we're very proud of.
All right, we're getting close. One more question. Is this regional? Are Northeast carriers in your system currently?
Well, yes. There are Northeast carriers in our system right now. There are East Coast, Southeast, and definitely we have the Texas area covered as well.
All of the U.S., right?
Pretty much all of the U.S., yeah.
All right, I know that I didn't get to all the questions, and if I didn't, I will follow up personally and make sure we get those answered. A great way to get in touch with us, if you look on the screen, you can go to our website, browse.com, and if you do /demo, if you're interested in learning more, we'd love to set up a time to speak with you individually and get more information about what you're looking to do and how you'd like to track your motor carriers, and we'd love to open up that conversation with you. With that, thank you, Annette, for joining us. Matt, appreciate your time. Alex, thanks so much. With that, we will conclude this presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.